Hello, I'm Dr. Sally Ann Zoll, CEO of United Through Reading, and I am so pleased to welcome you to the first webinar in the Resiliency Through Reading webinar series. This webinar series will show how resiliency through reading is attainable, accessible, and adaptable for every child in our very diverse military community. Each one of our webinars will feature a panel of experts who will discuss why the military community needs to make military family literacy a priority. So for those of you who are new to United Through Reading, we keep military families reading together no matter the distance between them. For 32 years, we have helped families stay connected through video recorded story time to help ease the stress of separation, to maintain positive emotional connections, and cultivate a love of reading and early childhood literacy. Service members can read, record, and send a story and book to their families at more than 200 recording locations worldwide, as well as on their mobile devices using our free and secure reading app. And since 1989, more than 2.5 million military families, members, and their families have benefited from United Through Reading. So today, I am joined by two leading experts to discuss how we can advance literacy skills in military children. Literacy is a foundational skill for lifelong learning, and reading aloud lays that groundwork for future educational success for our military children. Military life can really negatively impact military children's education, and COVID-19 has certainly added even more to those challenges. So today's discussion will center around the unique educational risk factors that military children face and how reading aloud with United Through Reading can help build strong literacy skills for lifelong educational success. So now let me introduce our wonderful panelists. Dr. Leigh Ann Savio-Beers is Professor of Pediatrics and the Medical Director of Community Health and Advocacy at the Children's National Hospital, and she's currently the President of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Mrs. Barbara Thompson is the former director of the Office of Military Family Readiness Policy in the U.S. Department of Defense, and she's a national advisor to the Military Child Education Coalition and Blue Star Families, among many other things. So ladies, thank you both for joining me today for this discussion. I think we've asked you to provide opening remarks. So Dr. Beers, could we begin with you?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here today. It really is always an honor to talk about these important issues. And I'll just start, just with a few minutes of opening remarks to tell you a little bit about my background and my work with military families and just why I'm so appreciative of this focus on literacy for military families. So I actually started my career as a Navy doctor. I now work in Washington, D.C., and I'll tell you about my career as a Navy doctor in a moment, but I now work in Washington, D.C., actually on a lot of initiatives focused on early childhood and supporting families to decrease the impacts of adversity in their lives and communities, as well as increasing access to mental health services. And so really this has been something, an aspect of my career that's been important to me all along. When I started my career as a Navy doctor, I trained at the Naval Medical Center in Portsmouth and then spent some time as a pediatrician in Guantanamo Bay at the naval base there. And then worked. Yes, it was a unique experience, actually, very formative in a lot of ways. And then spent time at what was then called the National Naval Medical Center, now Walter Reed, but the Naval Hospital in Bethesda. And we were talking about this before we came on, was there on September 11th, 2001. And so really caring for families during a very stressful time in our military's history. And I think that's, one of the important things I want to talk about in these few minutes is just, as you mentioned, Dr. Zoll, the military families really face a lot of unique stresses, and particularly my time in Guantanamo Bay, and then the post 9/11 time here in DC in Bethesda. those were particularly unique stresses, I think, for military families, and really highlight some of the things that families do experience. In Guantanamo Bay, it was a very isolated duty station, and families were often very separated from family supports and other supports. And they provide, of course, there was a childcare and education and other things on the base, but it was a small base, so there wasn't a lot of choice, and those were a lot of stresses on families too. And then post 9/11, and particularly with the deployments, and we the medical corps at the Naval Hospital staffed the USS Comfort, and that was preparing to deploy as well. And so, really caring for families during a period of time where they were facing imminent deployment, and not certain what the next day would bring, what that impact was going to be on their families, I think really highlights some of those unique stresses. And I think when we think about child development and how important that is, it's very clear that child development really is two generational. It's about the child, but it's about the whole family, and it's about how the family is really interacting together. And those things are all such important influences on child health development and wellness. And so, I think, thinking about that, and then thinking about how we can strengthen and support those things, reading together is just one of those most important things. Well, I'm sure we'll get to this in the Q&A, but it's children who have strong literacy skills do better in school, and they feel more confident. It's a wonderful opportunity for connection and bonding between children and their family members. It's a wonderful way to provide consistency and stability, and an opportunity for attachment and interaction. And so, just such an important thing. And when family members sometimes may not have the opportunity to do that as easily because they're separated or under stress or deployed, the supports and resources to allow them to do that is just so important. So, and I think I'll close there in my remarks, because I know we'll talk about a lot of this during the question and answer, but just also really want to again close with my thanks for having me here today, and just really want to communicate my really deep respect for military families and our service members, because they really are an incredible and special group of people, and to be able to do anything we can to support them really is an honor. So thank you.
Well, you are most welcome, and your comments were spot on. You saw Barbara and I shaking our heads all the way through your remarks, because you definitely have the experience and the expertise to understand what our military families are going through on a daily basis. So thank you very much. We're delighted you're here. All right, Ms. Barbara Thompson, would you like to make some opening remarks, please?
So, I've had a very long career serving military families. I retired in 2017 after 41 years. And my journey during those 41 years took a lot of different paths, including being a Child Development Center director, and eventually becoming the director of the Office of Military Family Readiness Policy, which provides all of the oversight and policy and programming of quality of life issues for military families. And during that time frame, it was right after 9/11, I had the opportunity to be a Harris Fellow with 0 to 3. And that's where my passion really was forged in the in utero and early childhood period of time, because that really is the foundational piece. And I worried during 9/11 and the deployments how the father who was not going to be available to his partner who was pregnant and they were separated, how that was going to impact the cohesiveness of the family, the eventual cohesiveness of the child and the dad, and then even the triad. How was the mother going to interact with this person coming back into their lives after they created a routine? And so I really felt very strongly with the programming that we were providing that we needed to look at those time frames, because as Dr. Beer said, attachment and relationships are the key for everything that's going to come in the future. And so, when we talk about early literacy, I can't disconnect it from language. And I think it's so important that we emphasize the extension of language, and that families and parents and significant adults in that baby and toddler's life need to know that speaking to them and eliminating the word gap that we talk about for, the children to go into school, that they don't have the vocabulary, or they've never seen a book and know what it's like, that those things can really have a long-term impact on their development. And so I think, programs such as United Through Reading and 0 to 3 offered us the amazing capability of providing these resources for military parents who needed them. They were isolated, they were separated, they were under great stressors due to deployments and danger. And so having these opportunities to comfort and to support and to edify our military families are really meaningful. And the department recognizes that we may not have the core competencies within our realm. We need organizations such as United Through Reading to really support military families with whatever their challenges are at a given time. And so I applaud United Through Reading and the work that they've done to build resiliency and, again, children's educational future. And again, that's just so important. And I think the more that we can do with parent engagement and helping parents understand the developmental trajectory of brain development and why these things are so important, that we don't take them for granted, that they really are things that we need to learn about. And even, as parents, do we remember those nursery rhymes? Do we remember the wheels on the bus and Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to be able to engage our children with those language opportunities? I think it's really critical. So thank you.
Thank you. I love your comment about the connection between language and literacy, and that you can't disconnect that. I think that's a really crucial point. Obviously, both of you have been in the thick of things with our military families for a long while. And so I really look forward to this continued discussion this morning about our military families and the importance of literacy in working with them. Dr. Beers, from a medical perspective, can you make the link for us between reading aloud and the child's brain development? I mean, why is reading aloud so important?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and thank you for that. And I'll bear with me. I promise not to get too wonky about this, but I just want to talk for a moment even just about early childhood brain development. I think, Barbara, you brought this up too, but 90% of a child's brain development happens in the first 5 years of their life. And so when you think about that and think about what a remarkable and important time that is for a young child, I think sometimes it reframes the way we think about little kids. Sometimes people think about very young kids as like, oh, they're just really little. They don't, they're not learning anything or doing anything. And that's so much not the case. So much of their brain development happens. And you're part of how your brain works and functions. You've got these neurons and they connect with each other, and they're at their peak really in the first couple of years of life. And when those neuronal connections, those synaptic connections aren't used, they kind of fade away. And if they are used, they grow and they strengthen. And so the challenge for us, the charge for us is really to think about what are those ways that we grow and strengthen those connections within the brain so that we can help children, set them up to be really healthy and developing well for their whole lives. And some of the things that do that are stimulating and interactive experiences. There's a great concept called serve and return, where one of the most important things you can do to build babies' brains is interacting with them in a way that responds to them. So, the baby coos at you and you talk back to them and you have that interaction. And that's something that happens when you read together as a family, as a parent and a child. Even if, the baby is sort of then grabbing the book and chewing on the corner of it, that's okay. It's that interaction, that serve and return interaction that really builds brain development and really builds literacy for the long term. It also, reading aloud and reading aloud together, Barbara, to your point, it builds language skills and it builds language development. we know that kids who've been read to every single day actually start kindergarten with a much higher vocabulary and a much greater kindergarten readiness than kids who haven't. And so all of those things together really do support and build baby and infants and toddlers' brain development and their literacy, and those are things that then set kids up for really health and success and in the future, even moving forward. So,
well, you and Barbara once again are on the same page. As Barbara mentioned earlier, in utero, even the importance of language with those babies who haven't been born yet. So I think we couldn't agree more with your comments. Barbara, when you led the Office of Military Family Readiness Policy, which is a very, very important office in the Department of Defense, you worked to define policy for many programs that reach military families and also that affect the military family quality of life. So within that construct, why do you believe that advancing literacy skills in military children is important?
So when we look at families holistically, and again, I think one of the things we learned is that so many of our military children either enter the military or they consider entering the military or they marry into the military. And so having a child who has had a very strong foundational education with problem-solving skills and ability to succeed, they're going to be a better military member when they become an adult. And so I think we look at it not just because of the individual child, it's the long-term investment into our force, because they are eventually going to serve in some capacity as an adult. And if they are going to enter the military, we want them to have reading skills and we want to have a good, sound educational background. And so I think, looking at policies and looking at programs, the policies change systems. And so they're difficult to craft and they're difficult to get consensus on, but at the same time, they change systems. And whether it's our early childhood program, our youth program, the Department of Defense education activity that supports their children's education for pre-K through high school, those policies are in effect to have outcomes that are successful for children. And we know parents want their children to be successful. And they're there as their first teachers, and they're there as their partners throughout their trajectory in their education. And so any opportunity that we have to to partner or connect with organizations that have a skill set that maybe we don't have in the department is very important. And so when we prioritize based on surveys and based on research, what are things that are important to military families? What are they challenged with? And we know in a child's education, a military child's education, they're moving every 2 to 3 years. They're changing schools. They're transitioning. They're having separations from their another significant parent in their life. All of those things are weigh heavily on us from the policy perspective and the program perspective, because we don't want them that their challenges are pulling them down. We want to edify them and to make sure that they have the skills and the resources that they need to succeed. And so that's why we have this Office of Military Family Policy, and that's why we get direction from Congress and we get direction from senior leaders in the White House to ensure that we're doing right by our families.
Yeah, and I think you made an excellent point at the beginning of your remarks when you said that those who are in the military were a child in a military family or know somebody in the military. You go into the military because you've had that experience. And so what's important about this conversation, I think, is that the military is 1% of our population. And so for our population to understand more about what our military families go through in the service to our country. Dr. Beers, I know the American Academy of Pediatrics endorses and works with the Reach Out and Read program, which is an amazing program. It encourages family read aloud time for brain development and for social and emotional benefits. So could you please tell us a little bit about that program and why it's so important to you and AAP?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's an amazing program. It's a wonderful program, and one that we actually have in my own pediatric practice here in DC as well. So I'm delighted to talk about it. So Reach Out and Read is a program that's really based in the pediatrician's office, and the way it works is that as a pediatrician, every time I see a child for a well checkup between the ages of 6 months and 5 years of age, I provide them with a new book. And then the family and I talk a little bit about literacy and early literacy and the importance of early literacy and how to learn together. And so it's on one level a very simple intervention, a very simple initiative, right? To share a book and talk about that for a minute or two. It really doesn't even often end up needing to be very, very long. But it's a simple intervention with so much impact for a couple of reasons. One is what we were all just talking about is the importance of literacy and early literacy on child brain development and family wellness. And so you have a chance to share that with families and talk about that. And sometimes parents don't realize that. They think, well, gosh, why should I read to my 9-month-old? They don't seem to be paying much attention. Or my 18-month-old, really just wants to grab the book and chew on it and throw it and things like that. And then you can talk about how that's okay. That's part of literacy, is getting your hands on those books and learning how to manipulate them and looking at the pictures and talking about the pictures. And so that's all okay. The other piece is that actually for many families, I take care of a lot of families who almost every book they own in those early years came from Reach Out and Read. They don't have houses full of books, and being able to give a book at each visit really then helps build their library at home and really sets a I guess it just sets a culture of reading and reading together that can carry on through a child's entire educational experience. It's actually and just speaking from personal experience, I will tell you that once the kids get old enough, when they come in, they're like, Dr. Beers, where's my book? They are asking for it, or they'll tell me, I already have this one, I want this one, and so that's great. We want kids to be that excited about books. We also recently have actually started to have, because the Reach Out and Read program is really for well child checkups, but we have so many patients ask us for books when they come in for sick visits that we hate saying no. So we have another sort of stash of books that we can give out at sick visits if a family asks, if a child asks, because we never want to say no, you can't have a book. So it just really is a wonderful program in so many ways, both from that tangible being able to give the book, but also what we get out of the communication around literacy and teaching about literacy.
United Through Reading and Reach Out and Read are really similar in ilk, very similar in vision and mission. And as you said early on, it's simple. It's very simple, but it has such a profound impact on the children and their growth. And also the importance of building the libraries in the home. As you said, we know that the number of books in a home it's directly aligned to the academic success of the children. So the more books we can get in the home, the better. So thank you for that. Barbara, we've talked a lot about the importance of literacy with our military children. Can you drill down a little bit and talk a little bit about the benefits of reading aloud with children, even when they're very young, or as you said earlier, in utero?
Yeah, I really like the work that Patricia Kuhl has done at the University of Washington. She's shared that she's labeled the sensitive period of birth through age 3 as the linguistic genius of infants. And she's done a lot of work on second language acquisition and how children learn. And I think what's so critical is this whole issue of language, and it's not through a screen. She shows there's a difference whether a child is watching it on a screen are sitting with an adult and reading together out loud. And it's the personal contact that makes a difference in how the child is learning a language. And I think that's, reading out loud, again, it shows you change the cadence in your voice, you make the story come alive. It's really important, especially for young children, to have that interaction. And I would consider it cuddling time, the lap time where you're together, and building that attachment and that bonding with that significant adult, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, or a caregiver in the early childhood program. Literacy is critical. It's a key component in the DoD's military child development system, and we have beautiful libraries, and we help the caregiver learn how to read to children so that they engage and they begin to show that the words, the characters on a page mean something, and that eventually that connects to the words that I'm saying. All of those things are pre-reading activities. And if you want your child to be an emergent leader, you have to start when they're infants to do that and to show them how important it is. And for you to be a model, children need to see parents read. Whether it's a newspaper or a cookbook or a Bible, whatever it is that they're reading, and reading out loud, it makes a difference. And I will say again, language, however we can extend a child's vocabulary. And when in what you're doing and what you're touching, labeling objects, talking about setting the table. I know you're doing it at night, you're making dinner, you're busy. If you can just describe what you're doing and using those words are going to be embedded in that baby's brain, and you're going to be increasing their vocabulary. And again, it's just critical for their development.
I love what you said about early on about the cadence when you're reading aloud to a child. Research that came out of the UK that says it's better to read one book 25 times to a child than it is to read 25 books once, particularly because of that, because they do learn the cadence. They do learn to expect the words, the way your voice rises and goes down again. So I think that's particularly important. And of course, when you talk about the emotional cuddling, that's the best part of reading aloud in many ways, that emotional experience. So thank you for those remarks.
Well, and just because they're little and they sit on your lap, we should also be reading aloud to our school agers and our high schoolers, our secondary. I mean, we should be doing that as a family every night, reading out loud for all ages.
I couldn't agree with you more. Dr. Beers, I'd like to talk to you about military readiness with your background. You bring such a unique perspective to this session with your service in the Navy and as a doctor. Can you tell us about how military readiness is linked to family readiness? What impact, for example, does a program like United Through Reading have on family readiness, and why is that so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think this is really important, and sometimes something that people don't think about a lot. But in many ways, our experiences over the past 15 months now, the pandemic, probably have highlighted this for us in ways that maybe others haven't thought about as much. But our brains can only handle so much, right? There's only so much what we call cognitive load that our brains can take. And so if so much of what is occupying what we're thinking about and worrying about, if there are stresses in the family, or worries about our kids, or worries that they're not getting the things that they need, that takes up a lot of our brain capacity, as it should, because we all want to take care of our kids and our families. And when that's happening, it means it's harder to attend to the rest of our daily activities and the rest of our jobs and the rest of what we're doing. And so we're not going to be at our best if there are things in our home and with our family that we're troubling over and don't feel feel confident and supported in. And on the flip side, when we do feel confident and supported in those things, it gives us a little more freedom in our brains to be creative and really commit to our work outside of the home. And so for the service member, I think that's one, really important piece is just, the more well our service members are at home, the more well they're going to be at work. I think also, we've seen there's actually good literature about this in the business literature and in other places that when workplaces or work settings support their workers or their service members' families and support the things going on outside of the workplace, they perform better in the workplace. We see this with paid family leave and other things where just knowing that you have if your workplace or your service is willing to do those, willing to go out and on a limb and support your family and do things for you, you have a stronger commitment to them and a stronger passion to them, and you're going to be more passionate about the work that you're doing. So I think those are all really important ways that supporting families supports military readiness. I think it's one of the things we think about actually as pediatricians and military pediatricians is that there really is a unique role for military pediatrics because as pediatricians, and military pediatricians do have a unique understanding of that and the interplays of the stresses that a military family feels on top of the unique supports and care that the children and family may need. So it's something we think a lot about in military pediatrics as well.
So I'd like to point out that the first 4 letters in the word readiness are read. So we really think that reading is part of that family readiness situation. Barbara, in the military family support community, we talk a lot about improving military family quality of life. And I know that was and is a key factor driving the Department of Defense Office of Military Community and Family Policy when you were there. So how do programs like United Through Reading impact or support family quality of life? And more importantly, why is that so important to the Department of Defense leadership?
Well, I'd like to reiterate, we do equate mission readiness with family readiness. I mean, that's the title of the office that I formerly ran. And it's because we know when a service member is worried about his or her family, they're not concentrating on the mission at hand. And all of the resources that we can provide military families, we know supports the larger mission. And it took a while for senior leadership to recognize that. It's been a long journey, 41 years. You saw the differences in family support, and it really ramped up during 9/11 and post 9/11, where they recognized how stressful this was for families and how it was impacting the mission. And not only for the active duty, but for the Guard and Reserve families too. We can't forget them because they're not used to having these long deployments. Now they are after, 20 years of war, but now, they weren't. And they don't have the infrastructure that the active duty force has. And so looking at both active duty and reserve component families, I think is really critical for the office to think about policies and programs. And again, using the research and the survey mechanisms that the department has to find out where the gaps are and find out how we can overcome those gaps with organizations that provide these kinds of resources. And I think one of the things that we never really crack the nut on how to make sure families know about these resources. There are so many wonderful resources for families to have, and they don't know that they're there. And pediatricians are trusted agents for families. And so we're trying to do, the department recently launched a pilot called Healthy Steps that is embedding a mental health, social worker, psychologist in the pediatric practice to support a family with whatever needs they have, whether it's, finding the right school for their child, or if it's a child with special needs, finding the right resources and helping that family navigate the world of not medicine, but also just life. And I think those are the kinds of things that when we look at the challenges facing families, we have to know what they are, and families need to be forthright with that, and then trying to find the resources that will mitigate those challenges.
I think you're exactly right that it took the department leadership a while to understand the importance of family wellness in mission readiness, and you, Barbara, were certainly instrumental in changing that thinking. So I thank you for that. So any last thoughts? You both offered up some really interesting comments and very cogent and on point in terms of the importance of literacy with our military families. Any saved rounds, as we would say? Dr. Beers?
A couple of things. Actually, the first thing I'll mention, just a little chuckle, just of what a small world this is. We run Healthy Steps out of children's as well, and actually one of my team members is a former 0 to 3 fellow and connected with the folks in the military who were getting Healthy Steps set up, and they actually talked a lot in those early stages. So that's a nice connection. It was nice to hear you bring that up, because it really is a wonderful program that really leverages the strengths of so many people. I think one additional thing I would point out about literacy that maybe we haven't been as explicit about is that this act of reading together is actually really, I think, stress reducing for the parent and the caregiver as well. To be, I don't want to say forced, but to sort of, be deliberate about carving out time every day to quietly sit down with your child, read a book together. That's actually wonderful structure and stress release for the caregivers as well. I know when my own kids, particularly when they were little, that was one of my favorite times of the day, where we all just kind of like collapsed in on the couch with a book and read together. And it was one of those few moments where everything else quieted down a little bit. And so I think really thinking about the benefits to the caregiver as well. But and then I think just as a final summarizing thought, just being, again, so grateful for the work of United Through Reading and others who do this type of work, because it's I heard someone the other day in a talk call something elegantly simple. It's such an elegantly simple approach to something that is so unbelievably impactful throughout a child's entire lifetime. And to be able to really value that and prioritize that, I think, is so important. And particularly for, as I said in my opening remarks, just the group of families who are just so special and really deserving of all the care and support we can provide to them, because they do so much for all of us. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Barbara, thank you for mentioning the reservists. They are certainly part of our military family, and the reservists and Guard definitely fall in a different kind of category, just because as you mentioned, their infrastructure is quite different. Our son is a reservist, so we understand that difference. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Do you have any last comments or remarks that you would like to make?
I would just like to say, it's really important when I think of the long-term deployments that our families faced, and maybe not so much now, but when they did, and how critical it was for us to keep the child in the mind of the parent who was separated, and the parent in the mind of the child, no matter how young the child was so critical. And the United Through Reading, that opportunity where children and the deployed parent can share a book together, can see each other, can reread it by themselves, and think about that special time with that parent who they miss very dearly. It's just such a beautiful thing to see, and I think it does do that. It keeps both child and deployed parent connected, and how important that is when we know a lot of research went into the post-deployment stage and how difficult that was for families to get reset, if you will, having the parent come back after being gone for over a year, having, the parent who stayed behind had their routines in place and everything was rolling smoothly for the most part, and then having this new person come back in and upset the apple cart, and especially if there were an injury, whether it be visible or invisible. I think, these kinds of programs can mitigate the emotional roller coaster that families go through when they have been separated for any length of time. And reading is so important. I really think it's important that it's with a book, not with a screen. And I hope Dr. Beers might say something about screen time, because I know during COVID, that's our reality right now, but we need to readjust if we're getting out of that mode, so that we are doing things face to face and not in front of a screen, especially for our babies and toddlers. The interaction with a real person is just too important to say, okay, just plop the baby down in front of the screen and they'll be entertained for a while. We know it's not going to have an impact on their vocabulary. We know it's not going to make a difference in their educational success. So I think those kinds of things need to be reiterated, and the tools given to parents so that they know this is when they can use screen time and this is when they really do need to be present for their child.
Thank you for pointing out the importance of that book. Over the years, 32 years with United Through Reading, all of our beneficiaries have said how important that book is, and that's why we make sure that we get the book, the real book, sent home to the child to build the library, as Dr. Beers has pointed out. And yes, Barbara, that book is very important, especially when mom or dad or grandma or grandpa has just read it. So thank you for pointing that out. Thank you both for such a really thoughtful and insightful discussion. I think we've definitely established that literacy is a foundational skill for lifelong learning, and that reading aloud lays that groundwork for future educational success for our children. So while, as you both pointed out, while military service members are going to continue to serve, they're going to continue to deploy, they're going to continue to relocate their families, our 1.5 million military children are going to continue to face the challenges of new schools, missing parents, and disrupted routines. And so with the right approach, I think, including United Through Reading, our military children and families can learn resiliency and strengthen readiness through reading. So Dr. Beers and Barbara, thank you again so much. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. A reminder that the next webinar in the Resiliency Through Reading series will be held on May 19th, and it will address building community through military family literacy. So please mark your calendars and register to attend at utr.org. Thank you again. Have a great day. We look forward to seeing you on May 19th.
Bye.